Right, hello guys, welcome back. So, today we're going to be talking about Sanguine Alchemy and the major rework it received alongside episode Revenant. Now, Sanguine Alchemy is no stranger to reworks. In fact, it was around this time last year that it was changed to provide a ×2 super matching weapon surge while standing in a rift or Well of Radiance, which back then was sadly not enough to move the needle. So what does it do now? Well, the latest rework has improved the weapon surge from ×2 to ×4, which is the highest possible tier of surge available, sitting at a 25% weapon damage buff, and the exotic has also regained its old target mark feature, and now marked enemies receive 10% more damage from all sources. So technically this is a 10% unique debuff, though it only applies to Sanguine Alchemy users. I'm sure you've seen a handful of videos covering this change already, but I'm here to tell you that there's a lot more to it than there initially seems, and with the damage rotations that I'm going to be showcasing later, you might actually want to put down that Starry to Nova bomb in favor of Well of Radiance. And I know that sounds crazy, but if you stick around, I promise that you won't be disappointed. So let's start with a little bit of number crunching. While standing in a Well of Radiance without Sanguine Alchemy, my SMG hits for 959 to the body on Carl. With Sanguine Alchemy, this goes up to 1055, which is an additional 10% increase on top of the previous figure as expected. And furthermore, this also applies to abilities. Normally, my Fusion Grenade hits for 39,000 damage, but with Sanguine, it now jumps to 43,000 damage, which is again that 10% increase. So from this, we can tell that number 1, the Sanguine mark is a unique debuff that increases all incoming damage sources, and 2, your weapon affinity doesn't need to match that of your super in order to receive the 10% extra damage, since in the clip you saw I was on solar using a Strand SMG. The super matching element portion only applies to the weapon surges that the exotic also provides, which by the way also works when standing in a well, since as you can see here, simply sitting in a Well of Radiance grants me an indefinite 4x solar weapon surge when I have my parasite held. However, the neat thing about this rework is that anyone using Sanguine Alchemy can benefit from a Well of Radiance that isn't their own. So if I was running say Prismatic Warlock with an Arc super equipped and I stepped into a Well of Radiance while wearing Sanguine and the new Bittersweet Grenade Launcher, I would see an indefinite ×4 Arc weapon surge instead. But it doesn't stop there, because even if you're the Well caster, you can also take advantage of this by simply swapping to Pure Arc or Prismatic with an Arc super equipped. Of course, this is in the case of Bittersweet, and you also lose all of your ability energy, but as you'll soon find out, this is more than worth the trade. So enough talking, let's see some damage numbers. For this first test, I'm going to be using the aforementioned Bittersweet God roll of Envious Arsenal Bait and Switch alongside 2 Trace Rifles to proc the perk so that essentially all of the damage is coming from the grenade launcher itself. I'm going to place my well, then swap to a prismatic loadout that's equipped with Storm Trance to give that ×4 arc surge to Bittersweet, and I'm also going to be using the non-boosted version of the artifact perk Concussive Reload to provide weaken for myself. So without further ado, let's take a look. So there it is, 2.8 million damage is actually quite a good starting point considering that all we were using was the grenade launcher itself. So let's kick things up a notch, shall we? A rather strange quirk of Well of Radiance is that specifically for the Well caster, any damage you deal from within the well technically counts as ability damage rather than weapon damage. So for example, if I'm standing in a well and are shooting my Void Fusion Rifle, I'm actually dealing Void ability damage rather than Void weapon damage. And normally this doesn't have any effect at all, it's more of a technicality that goes largely unnoticed. However, the Prismatic Fragment Facet of Courage states that your Arc, Solar, and Void abilities deal increased damage to targets afflicted with darkness debuffs. And I think you can see where this is going. When we make our loadout swap to Prismatic after placing Well, we can now choose to include Facet of Courage on there to improve our weapon damage, which as I previously explained is technically ability damage. Facet of Courage is a 10% damage buff, so what this effectively means is that our Bittersweet is now going to be dealing 10% more damage because when in the well it counts as Arc ability damage instead. However, as I mentioned a moment ago, this only works for the Well caster. Anyone else who steps in the well will not have their damage converted to ability damage. It's only the caster who experiences this. Okay then, this now leaves us with the second part of needing a consistent source of darkness debuffs in order to actually make use of this. And it's here that the perfect weapon for the job comes in, the brand new Stasis double fire grenade launcher Liturgy. Liturgy gets the very specific role of Envious Arsenal Chill Clip, which for rotation purposes is excellent because it reloads itself in the background and is able to apply a darkness debuff in the form of slow for the purposes of proccing Facet of Courage. The only caveat about this specific role is that both perks are separated by a distance of 3 in the perk order, and if you know anything about the perk weighting scandal that's currently happening, then you know that the odds of getting a 3 distance combo to drop are roughly 1 in 400, so I wouldn't recommend farming this role until Bungie issues a fix, which they are currently working hard on, by the way, and to be honest, I'm more shocked that I even got it myself after learning the details. The alternative is an autoloading chill clip Lingering Dread, which thankfully is a perk distance of 1 if you want to farm it, though Liturgy will end up performing better because A, it's a double fire frame and they do roughly 30% more damage by default, and B, it meshes well with an artifact perk I'll be talking about shortly, but just know that having an auto-reloading chill clip weapon is essential to make this work. So enough yapping, let's see the damage. And now I'm doing the same as before on top of adding Facet of Courage to my prismatic loadout and including Liturgy in the rotation as well. As you can see, for simply adding in Facet of Courage and a source of slow, our damage increases by about 500k, which is pretty nice. Definitely a very good amount for the Wellcaster to be doing, but we can actually take this setup even further by making use of the artifact perk Conductive Cosmic Crystal. This perk states that your arc abilities, void abilities, and weapons with the Dark Aether Reaper origin trait do bonus damage to targets that are affected by a stasis debuff, and when boosted, this effect is increased even more. Now, there's 2 things that I want you to take away from that. The first is that it works for arc abilities, or in our case, arc weapons like Bittersweet, and second, it increases the damage of Dark Aether weapons, a weapon set that includes, you guessed it, Bittersweet. According to the compendium, when this perk is boosted, it's an 8% increase for abilities and 10% for Dark Aether weapons. But this raises the question, which bonus will be applied to our Bittersweet? Will it be only the ability portion because we're technically dealing arc ability damage, or does it get overridden and only apply the 10% for the Dark Aether weapon, or the more exciting third option, what about both? Well, let's test it, shall we? On Carl, my Dark Aether Pulse Rifle Vantage Point hits for 1252 normally and 1565 when I'm Radiant. And then, if I stand in my well and apply Slow to Carl while having the boosted artifact perk, we now hit for 1859. And if we work it out, this is an 18.8% damage increase compared to the Radiant test. But that's not either of the percentages listed on Compendium. So what's going on here? Well, if you multiply 1.1 and 1.08, you get 1.188, or 18.8%. So it turns out, you actually get both benefits from Conductive Cosmic Crystal for simply standing in a well with a Dark Aether weapon. This also circles back to why Liturgy is the perfect weapon for the job, because it too is a Dark Aether weapon. So it will also get the 10% buff from Conductive Cosmic Crystal, though not the ability boost because it's a stasis weapon rather than arc or void. So if we put everything together, how much more damage are we able to deal? Well, for this next setup, we're doing the same as before, but now I've added in Cloud Strike as a swap option for the energy slot to take advantage of the arc surges as well as Conductive Cosmic Crystal. And I've also added triple stasis surge to my leg armor to boost Liturgy by a further 22%, which truly highlights the beauty of Sanguine since it provides 4 times arc surge for our main guns, leaving the boot mod to take care of the secondary helpers. I've also slotted in kinetic impacts for a tiny bit of extra damage. Anyway, please enjoy the clip. So there we have it. The only thing I could say when I got this clip was wow, because 4.6 million damage for a relatively simple rotation that doesn't even include a damage super is frankly nuts. However, I do see some of you saying that double special is no longer practical to run, and I would have to agree, but the nice part about this rotation is that it can be done without Cloud Strike and not lose too much damage. I did the same exact rotation with Risk Runner instead and still hit 3.7 million, which could have been more if I kept shooting Liturgy and managed bait and switch a little better. Altogether, if you factor in Well, times 4 Surge, the Sanguine Mark, Facet of Courage, and Conductive Cosmic Crystal, you're actually dealing 2.25x damage in a well, which compared to just well and times 3 surges sitting at 1.53x is a noticeable jump for the slightest increase in effort. Of course, you are losing all of your abilities after exiting the damage phase and resuming mechanics, but in my opinion, this is well worth the trade of dealing massively increased damage as a result. So there we have it. As always, there will be dim links at the top of the description for you to copy the running and DPS loadouts, but apart from that, I hope you enjoyed the video and learned something new. Anyway, that's all I've got for today. I'll see you in the next one. If you made it this far, thank you so much. Your support means the world. And if you're really into the content I create, consider becoming a member of the channel, which not only lets you support me in the best way possible, it also nets you a whole host of awesome perks along with it. A massive shout out to these members up on screen, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now, dear viewer.